Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 358, and today's guest is Simon Taylor, founder and CEO of HYCU. One of the things that I love about this podcast is hearing the stories of entrepreneurs and the ambitious moves they make to build their companies. For example, last week's interview with Brian Liu was a perfect example where he and his co-founder co-called and got the most recognizable lawyer on the planet, that being Robert Shapiro, involved with LegalZoom in the early days of the company. Simon's story is also legendary. At the point of having an MVP, they wanted to partner with a fast-growing company called Nutanix. He flew out to the company's offices in California, and unannounced, he asked to speak to the CEO. After pitching his company and convincing team members during that initial unannounced call, the CEO did finally sit with him. And after building a backup solution for Nutanix, a partnership was established and they were off and running. HYCU is a leader in the multi-cloud and SaaS data protection as a service industry. The company's raised $140 million in venture capital funding to date. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like a discussion around leveraging a partnership model for a company's go-to-market strategy and how to build it with the right mindset and approach. Simon's background story, including receiving a signed book from legendary computer entrepreneur An Wang, the founder of Wang Laboratories, when his family moved to the US, starting his career in cubicle jobs, and how he learned the importance of rigor, like his experience as a 401k rep, answering phones, and how it helped shape him as an entrepreneur, building his first company in Prague, an IT outsourcing company which was acquired by Comtrade, and then his next company, a monitoring tools company that was acquired by Citrix, the full life cycle story of HYCU and all the details about their platform, the benefits of raising capital from corporate VCs, and so much more. Okay, before we get into this podcast interview, here is a brief word from our sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Simon. Simon, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. So you're a serial entrepreneur. You've accomplished a lot, and we're going to talk about the current company that you've been scaling. But before we get into that, one of the things that I noticed throughout your professional history was your go-to-market approach. Now, there's some companies that would, and actually had a founder recently on my podcast that was all about outbound sales, right? Just having a collaborative team. They're all working together and they're, doing whatever they're doing as far as outbound activity, whether it's emails, making dials, whatever. But you have a different approach that's more on the partner side of go-to-market. So I thought it'd be helpful to understand your way of thinking there, and then, advice for entrepreneurs that may consider that model.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the word partner is a really important one to understand. Partner is not a replacement for the word selling. And I think sometimes when people approach the world of entrepreneurship or starting up companies or scaling companies, what they really mean when they say, I want to partner with you, is I want to sell you my service. And so I think the very first thing to keep in mind is when you are partnering, the approach needs to be very empathy driven. It needs to be, what does the other person across the table need most? And is there a way for us to collaborate so that we both get something of equal or greater value? And so I think one of the examples I often talk about is in one of my earlier companies, we built a wonderful relationship with Citrix. And, if you call up Sridhar Malapati, who's the EVP for product at Citrix today, and you say, hey, what was it like working with Simon Taylor? He'd say, well, we worked together, we partnered. And I'm very proud of that because, that was 2 companies ago. We sold that company to Citrix ultimately. But what we did is we tried to understand what Citrix, a much larger company, was trying to achieve. And in the case of Citrix, they were trying to achieve a great relationship with Microsoft. And so we were able to walk in and not say, hey, we have the best technology. We were able to come in and say, we understand that this Microsoft partnership is really important for you. Here's how we think our little company could support your path to greatness with that relationship. all of a sudden it takes a lot of the pressure off that discussion. You find yourself, really building a relationship because you're sitting across the table and going, I understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, and I think I can play a small part in trying to help make that happen. And I think that's what it is. It's when you're in these David and Goliath scenarios, it's not always about taking the slingshot and shooting the other guy's eye out. A lot of times it's about actually sitting there and going, hey, I'm a lot smaller than you are, but I think I've got something really great and a value to offer you. And let's have a conversation about whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, I think like anything, relationships matter so much. Obviously, you have to have a powerful solution that's adding value to their portfolio of solutions that they're providing. But relationships are so key, not hoping that this is going to be the silver bullet that's going to generate all the revenue for your company.
It's funny you mentioned Silver Bullet. I've got a funny presentation I used to give, and it's got a picture of Harry Potter on it with a big red X, and it says, no magic, no silver bullet. We're here to build something together. And the idea really is that I think, we often get lost in this idea that technology is going to win. And it's very rarely tech that wins. And you could argue in the nascent world of AI, maybe having the better, stronger algo or something is going to be helpful. But in general, when you're building any kind of business, whether it's a hot dog stand or a technology company, I think at the end of the day, it is about those relationships. It's about people being aware of who you are and who your company is, and understanding they're going to get a great amount of value out of what you're offering. And I think that comes from this idea of partnering. I looked up on LinkedIn this morning and I saw one of these in-mail chats from an outsourcing company that was trying to sell to me. And it said, hey, we think we're the perfect partner for you because, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, they've got, a number of outsourced engineers and they're trying to sell C programmers or something like that, or Java programmers. And you just think to yourself, it's kind of a bastardization of the word partner, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't know what I'm trying to do. You don't understand anything about, our business. You haven't had a conversation even, but you're throwing out this word partner so that I don't feel like I'm getting sold to. And I think we got to stop that trick. We got to stop the con, and we really got to start looking at partnering the way it was intended to be used, which is let's actually get to know how we can work together to collaborate and create more value than we would have independently.
All right, well, let's rewind the clock. So where did you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Precocious. I don't know if that's the right word. So I was born in London, England. My father worked for Wang Labs, if you remember Wang back in the day.
Sure.
And Dr. Ann Wang actually got us our green cards, and we came over here, and he signed a book for me when I was, I think, 4 years old, and it just said "Work hard," Ann Wang. And
That's cool. Wow.
yeah,
That's really cool.
there's a bit of tech history, right? I mean, it's funny.
Yeah,
People
big
these days
time.
don't even remember Wang, but it was such a key part of, the sort of Massachusetts technology world, and I think the US technology world at the time of DEC and analog devices, and you had Wang. And so I was sort of deep rooted in tech, from a very young age. My father went on to become the CIO of a large investment company, and he was a buyer of hundreds of millions of dollars in technology in the 80s and 90s. And so you would hear stories about Larry Ellison and Bill Gates and all these people kind of growing up. And it was just interesting to me that I think growing up around a technology buyer, somebody who was really deep in the street with purchasing next generation software and next generation hardware, you really sort of understood from how important those relationships really were going to be. So I grew up in Boston, but then I went to college back in London, got my MBA in Spain at Institute Impresa in Madrid, and I started my first company in Prague in the Czech Republic. I think that's kind of where my career really took off. I had this idea, going back, I don't know, to 2004. And the idea was that I was going to build an algorithmic matching engine that was going to help identify, was going to have a database of software engineers with all these characteristics, and almost like a dating app. It was going to connect buyers of outsourced engineering with the actual, database of engineers. And I decided to move to Prague because it was cheaper. And I thought, I'll go out there, I'll raise a little capital, and I'll go build this company. And I did that. And I sold that in 2006.
But you didn't come out of college. So you went to Northeastern,
Yeah.
and then what were some of your first jobs before, getting your MBA?
Oh my gosh. so many, I call them cubicle jobs, right? So I worked at Thompson Financial. I worked at Putnam Investments for a few. I worked at Forrester Research, and huge respect for all these businesses. I think actually one of the best things somebody can do is go to a job they don't necessarily love, but that has an enormous amount of rigor really early in their career. Because I will tell you that, being an entrepreneur, you have no guardrails, and you have to know to some extent how to put those guardrails in place to be successful. And so, my first job, I remember I was a 401k representative at Putnam, and it was thank you for calling Putnam Investments. Can I help you with your 401k plan? And I think it was 2 bathroom breaks a day or something.
This is like, I'm like, wait, people need to know this about you because it's not like you just went straight into entrepreneurship and exited a
No,
company. No, you earned, your way. Like same where I work for a staffing firm that I absolutely am grateful for, but
yeah,
60 dials a day you had to make.
yes,
If you didn't, you were going to be in major trouble.
major trouble. Well, and I think it's lost. Sometimes I see these, whatever reels and different things that people talk about, today, where it's sort of people who came out of COVID have a very different expectation of the way the job market really functions and works. And I actually think that putting yourself, it's like anything else, whether it's, physical training or sports or, acting, it doesn't really matter. You have to really practice your craft, and you've got to find ways to be surrounded by people that are better than you. And when you are 22 years old, and you think you're probably going to be good at sales, or you're going to have a little bit of a biz dev sort of impulse, I think there's no better way than to learn how to actually have a proper conference call, how to actually show up to work every day, how to build some rigor into your schedule. And so, yes, so I mean, I started there, and then, I went into the investment world for a little while. And then I started to make this sort of migration. I remember when, I remember being actually, I was in a call center selling 401k plans, when the planes hit the towers on 9/11. And the whole world sort of changed. I mean, it was so horrible and powerful, sort of sitting there and watching that happen. And we were in this giant call center. I mean, it was really giant. And the parent company of that company was actually headquartered in the towers. So while I did not, I don't profess to know anybody there, just being around that, I think had such a huge impact on me. It's actually not something I don't think I've ever mentioned on the podcast before, but it was very impactful. And what it said to me was, I want to go and build something or sell something that is more tangible than just financial services. Because to me, financial services felt like just moving money around. And so I got interested again. I think maybe, going back to my, father's roots there, I got interested in technology, and I started trying to find a way to move into tech, and ultimately found myself at Forrester Research, where I was reading about every technology known to man. And they wrote some wonderful research about it. And I realized I don't want to just write about it or read about it. I want to go do it. And so it was sort of 4 jobs in and having these experiences that got me ultimately to a point where I sort of said, you know what, I want to go and take the plunge here. And I'm surrounded by all this wonderful research. Why don't I sit down and actually try to write my own business plan? And I didn't go into it lightly. I often talk about just running over to Prague and starting a company, but in reality, it was 6 months of writing and 6 months of thinking about how do you actually build a business plan, and how do you do that? They're really, at that time, I had never taken a business course on it in school, and so for me, it was about figuring out what that model should look like, figuring out where I could add some value, and then figuring out what my unique sort of angle was going to be. And that's ultimately what led me to moving to Prague and to sort of my first company.
And so you said this was like 2007, 2008. So yeah, like we talk about your background, it just wasn't a logical step to go build your own, development firm, matching up engineers with companies where I'm trying to think 2007, 2008, like offshoring was a thing, like mostly in India,
Yeah.
maybe some in China, but not, Prague was like not really an explored area from
That's
my
it.
recollection.
You nailed it. I kept reading about the BRIC countries, right? It was all about the BRIC at the time. It was Brazil, Russia, India, China were kind of, everybody was talking about those countries. But really, when you said outsourcing, everybody thought, oh, India. He means India, right?
Right.
Well, what I realized is that, if you looked at, sort of the rollback of the USSR and the Soviet Union, and you looked at all of the science and math that was in Eastern Europe, it seemed to me that there was just an amazing abundance of technology and engineering talent in that region. And so what I did is I thought, if I could be there and I could sort of build inroads with, again, partnering with lots of different companies and organizations across Eastern Europe, I may be able to build a really unique set of talent that I could bring back to the US. And I did that. I went to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, all over, and I'm 25 years old, kind of running around Eastern Europe, building these relationships. And, was there hubris involved in that? For sure. Right. I mean, what did I know at that age? But I was able to sort of walk into a room and just say, hey, I think if you give me a database of your engineers, I think that I can help you find business. And again, sort of like playing to where the value is and working towards the value. That was a really, really unique example of sort of, guerrilla marketing and entrepreneurship in action.
Well, so like, how did you even get that started? Because there was a lot of competition. I mean, the
Yeah.
large consulting behemoths to
Oh,
smaller offshoring shops. Like, how did you even get started for, like you said, a 25-year-old pitching this idea and
so I
trusting
think
your
I
firm?
first so I first moved actually to Prague in 2005, I think it was about
Mhm.
2005. And so 2005 was only 6 years, if you think about it, after a lot of the massive changes had gone in. It was the sort of end of the 90s, early 2000s. These were countries that had just opened their first McDonald's, that were really at that time just starting to figure out what capitalism looked like. And frankly, I felt they had been overlooked by a lot of the larger consulting firms. If you go to Prague today, you see the Accenture, KPMG, you see all the signs, right? But in 2004, 2005, you didn't see any signs of companies you recognized. It was very, very early days. And if you went further east, if you went to Latvia, Lithuania, or Romania, Bulgaria, etc., you saw almost nothing that you recognized. There was usually the token McDonald's in the capital city, and that was sort of it. And so what I used to do is just walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Simon Taylor from the United States, and I'd like to sit down with you and have a conversation about how we can bring you to the U.S. market." And I found myself, I mean, this gets a little almost fantastic, but I found myself in meetings with deputy prime ministers, all sorts, because they just weren't getting any attention from the West. And so I found myself in this really unique sort of space where I was sometimes the lone American, in these countries, and people sort of couldn't figure out why the hell I was there. You know, how did you end up here? Who are you? But I was very confident in them. It was never confidence in myself. It was more that I was very, very confident that these were countries that had a lot to offer. And one of the first things I realized was that when you go there to Eastern Europe in the early 2000s and you ask somebody, what's the preferred job? In the US, maybe in the 2000s or 90s, it was doctors and lawyers. Everyone's parents wanted them to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? Well, today, or sorry, in Eastern Europe at the time, it was all engineering. Everybody would say, "Oh, I want my son, I want my daughter to be an engineer." And so you had two interesting things. One, you had more women per capita in engineering, which I found really interesting. But you also just had an enormous amount of English language fluency because when you're coding every day, you end up with a pretty strong baseline in English. And I felt like from a time zone perspective, this was a lot closer than India, and I thought there was really something to this. And that's really what kicked it off for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's important to understand kind of you know, you were in the roots of getting this started. It wasn't just magically happened. Now,
Right.
but eventually, it was acquired by Comtrade. Is that
That's right. Yeah.
the
So
sequence? Okay.
eventually, I met a guy named Veselin Yervasimovich who was, they call him the Bill Gates of Eastern Europe, and this guy had about 30 different tech companies at a time when nobody had 30 companies over there. I think he's something like 10,000 employees. I mean, he had really built for that region was a really massive business. And he just took a shine to me. He sort of I remember walking into his office in my 20s and he said, "Who the hell are you?" And we sat down and we started a conversation. And he said, "Look, I like your company. I think it's interesting, but more, I want you to go and help me build the US market for this company, Comtrade." And so, we sort of put the companies together. And then I went back to the US and I set up a company called Comtrade Group in Boston. And I was selling outsourcing. I was doing the very thing that I did not like. But what I was learning was how to bridge this divide between these different cultures. Ultimately, I decided to go get my MBA, so I moved to Spain. When I graduated with my degree, he and I spoke again, and we decided that we would do something different. And so he actually funded my next company, Conference Software, which was a monitoring tools company that we ultimately sold to Citrix. And then after that, we had the idea for HYCU, and that's sort of, what landed us, in the company we're in today.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. Perfect. All right, that's a great segue. So let's talk about HYCU. So, like, how did that idea to come to fruition?
It was really interesting. We had just sold to Citrix, and I remember, it was the big Citrix Synergy event, and it was really neat to see the company name on stage, and they're talking about the acquisition and all these things. And I went to the bar afterwards with a bunch of folks, and I ran into a software engineer architect that I had known from my first company named Goran Gorevsky. And, we were just joking around with each other, really. And I asked him what he was doing. He said he was in the data protection field. And I said, my God, backup. That sounds terrible. That's terribly boring. Who cares about backup? And he said, well, you should care about it. And I said, yeah, but it's kind of one of those things, backing up data, right? I mean, this is, remember, this is 2000 and, oh gosh, I'm losing track now. This is probably 2013, 14, something like that. And I said, there's so many backup companies. And he said, yeah, but none of them are doing it right. And we sat down and we had this long conversation about, the history of data protection. And what really got me interested in this was he said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, you didn't take a taxi cab to get here, did you? And I said, no, I took an Uber. And he said, that's the problem. There's no Uber in data protection. There's a lot of different taxi companies, and they're old and they don't work well, and it's difficult, and you can never find one when you need one. I mean, it's very inaccessible. And I got really excited about this idea that, we could disrupt an industry that was so powerful and that was so pervasive and had such a massive total addressable market. And I said, so tell me the history of data protection. Help me understand the history of it. And he said, you had a company that was there and designed to build, back up Unix. You had another company that was designed to back up VMware. You had another company that was designed to back up Windows. And I said, okay, so that's the problem. The problem is that today, people don't keep their data in one place. They keep their data in literally thousands of different places because you've got all the cloud services, you've got everything on-prem, and you've got all of these great SaaS services. I'm sure you interviewed tons of different SaaS companies, right? Well, each one of those represents a different attack vector, a different threat vector. And I said, if we could create sort of a Swiss Army knife of data protection that makes it easy to provide backup and recovery everywhere, no matter where your data sits, that would be something. That would be something really exciting. And so we've spent the last, few years doing that. And we launched a company called HYCU. HYCU stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. And, the way we named the company is we're thinking about, what's a word that means taking all the data in a language and boiling it down into a small, elegant package. And we thought about a haiku poem and how much, that sort of resonates with people. And of course, we couldn't get the correct spelling of the URL. It'd be too expensive. So we came up with an acronym, HYCU, HYCU, Hybrid Cloud Uptime, and away we went. Today we have 4,000 customers in 78 countries around the world.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
So how did you get started? Because, this is a grandiose, major boil the ocean type of idea, yet, you gotta like start somewhere and kind of like approach the market. So what was the kind of the original start?
So we went back to our prior investor from the last company, and we said, will you fund us through the C round? We've just both made a bunch of money in Citrix. Why don't we take some of that and sort of put it together and create something new? And so we took on Veselin Yevsimovic as an investor once again, and he gave us our seed capital effectively. But what really happened is that we built a very small sort of, MVP for the product. And I realized that I realized that we would need a partner who was really going to help us get our name out there. I used to say we need to find a partner where for every penny we spend, we get 100 pennies in value. And somebody called me up one day and they said, "Hey, have you ever talked to Dheeraj Pandey from Nutanix?" And I said no. And I looked up Nutanix and got to understand, and I obviously had heard about them, how sort of fast they were growing. And I showed up at the office. I literally flew out to California from Boston, and I walked into the office of Nutanix, and I just asked to speak to the CEO.
Wait. Unannounced, you just showed up. You flew out
Completely
west and just showed
unannounced.
up.
Completely unannounced. And I remember
That's
they brought up this great, wonderful guy. I won't use his name, protect the innocent here, but he was fabulous. And they rolled out, I think, the newest hire in the company to talk to the crazy guy that was at the door. And as I started talking to him, he kept bringing in more people and more people and more people until ultimately, Dheeraj walks in and he says, "Look, I have no idea who you are. I have no idea if you can do anything you say you can do, but if you can build me a backup product for Nutanix, I'll take a meeting with you." And I said, "Okay, give me 1 year." And I walked in 7 days shy of a year, sat down with Dheeraj and the executive team at Nutanix, Sunil Patti at the time and others. And I showed him the product and we said, "Look, it works." And from there, we had really found a partner because you had this super high growth kind of rocket ship company, Nutanix, that had just taken off. And we had built the world's first purpose-built backup and recovery software for them. And it was easy to use and it looked like theirs and it felt like theirs. And there was no training required. And I did all of it, on a handshake, on this handshake with the CEO and founder, who I really liked and trusted. And to this day, Dheeraj has been a great mentor to me and a great friend.
a great story. I love that. Just flying out and that just shows kind of like entrepreneurship at its finest. Like just I'm just gonna go out and make my own meeting,
Don't make
not
it
be
happen.
yeah. Well, kudos to you.
Well, I
Uh
think part of it, I think, is it's all. I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, and maybe did not do a great job. But I was talking to somebody, and they said they were asking for my advice on entrepreneurship, and I said just kind of know where you sit in the room, because I think a lot of times we're always taught to be the smartest guy in the room or smartest woman in the room, and that's great if you're in a position of power. But if you're walking in as an entrepreneur, just being the smartest person in the room doesn't count for much. I mean, really what matters more is that you can connect with somebody else and provide value. And I think if you're willing to kind of be shameless in your ability to get out there and do that, and you act with integrity, I think people really respond well to it. And I think that's what really matters.
all right, so I either read or I heard you say on another podcast, the a problem that companies face today, or this is recent, on average have 212 different data silos.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yes. So, again, if you think about like the way a tech environment looked 30 years ago, right? You probably had a bunch of like maybe you had an old mainframe, or you had a bunch of IBM servers or some Oracle Sun servers or something. You go back 10 years ago and you had your on-prem, you had all the data in your basement, and then you had some cloud, right? So that's okay. I've got 5 or 6 different types of servers. I've got a couple of different clouds that I'm using. I'm using AWS, I'm using Azure, maybe Google. Great. But today, what's happened is we've moved so much of our application and database usage to SaaS. So everything is now software as a service. We're using DocuSign for CLM, and we're using this one for that, and we're using Jira for ticketing, and Okta for identity management, and Rike, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is being provided as an off-premises service. And as a result of that, our data has not just increased, it is splintered, it's fractured across thousands and thousands and thousands of different SaaS services. And nobody knows where that data actually is. If you go to a CIO and you say, "Well, what SaaS services do you use?" They likely won't know. And if you say to them, "And where did they keep all their data?" They definitely won't know. And so I mean, we've entered this world. Actually, I wrote this little book about it called Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse, because my view 2 years ago was at some point somebody's going to mess up something with one of these SaaS services, and the whole world is going to kind of stop for at least a few minutes. That was what the whole book was about. And then we had that CrowdStrike outage, and it was sort of like, yeah. And people said to me, yeah, but Simon, that wasn't a ransomware attack. And I said, I know it wasn't a ransomware attack, but we need to open our eyes, right? I love SaaS. We're a SaaS service. There's nothing wrong with SaaS. But we need to know that when we turn on a SaaS service and we integrate it into our digital world, we are actually ceding control and power to an unknown third party. And so the only way you can take back that control and try to protect yourself is by backing up your data and making sure you've got a local copy of all of your jewels, all of your gems. And the way you do that is you back up all of your data to a local copy, and you make sure it can be restored at a time and place of your choosing.
So your typical customers, is it like, are you working with, enterprises, SMBs, like, or all the above, or?
It's really all the above. We've got 4,000 customers in 78 countries, including, I think, 12 federal governments. We have 178 branches of the United States federal government as a customer. And part of the reason is it's really easy to use. So we allow our customers, whether it's a large company, a small company, or government, we allow them to visualize and see where all of their data is. So they know these are the services that are actually in my environment. This is where they are. This is where the data is. And then it tells you what's backed up, what's not backed up. And if you want to turn on a backup and recovery for it, you can pull up our marketplace and very easily turn on that integration. And so imagine, I mean, to give you one of my favorite examples, there is a Navy in the world, a very, very well-known Navy. And they sent out, 3 different kinds of data protection technology with one of the ships as a POV. And the ship's captain came back 6 weeks later and said, I could only figure out how to turn HYCU on. And so we ended up backing up recovering the whole Navy. And so it's things like that. Sometimes, it's about the power of technology. Sometimes it's about the power of simplicity and about the ease of use, because I think, in today's world, nobody wants to be fiddling with knobs and dials. Like, we want to turn it on, we want to make it really easy, and we want to make sure you can see and gain control over your entire technology and data estate.
So they could see, like, a Fortune 500 company. Okay, our sales team's using Salesforce. They would see the data and be able to back up all that data.
That's it.
And then
That's it.
across the whole enterprise.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what it allows, I call it, empowering IT, because I think what happened over the last 10 years, you had a lot of IT departments who would say, well, we're going to kind of cede control of the line of business. Like, we can't stop shadow IT. I used to hear this all the time. Can't stop shadow IT. They're going to do it anyway. Just let them go buy the SaaS services they want, but they can't call us when there's a problem. Well, that's great until you realize that about half of ransomware attacks today actually occur through SaaS. And so it is everybody's problem. It is everybody's problem. And ultimately, even if IT wasn't involved in buying Salesforce, if there's a problem, they're definitely calling IT with that problem. And so what we do is we allow you to, back up and recover on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS, visualize where all the data is. And so any IT person can just click on the button and they can see this sort of beautiful tree that creates a visualization of their entire environment. So it'll show every department, sales is using Salesforce, finance is using this, engineering is using this, et cetera, et cetera. But it will also tell you where the threats are. It will tell you this is not in compliance with all of your policies, or this data is not recoverable. And so now the IT department's looking at that and going, well, wait a second, let me call marketing and ask them why they bought a solution where they're uploading all of our confidential files and it's not recoverable. And this used to be a very internal problem, but what started to happen is that regulators today, especially in banks, regulators are coming after them and saying, show me your local copy. And they'll say, well, it's not my data. The data is all sitting somewhere else. It's in SaaS. And they say, well, yeah, that's great. The shared responsibility model is pretty clear. They're providing the service. The data's on you. So show me your copy. And so I think what HYCU is really able to do for those companies is make it very, very easy to ensure that they've got local copies of all their data and can recover it in sort of a moment's notice.
Because the ransomware attack is on the vendor, right? The SaaS vendor that they're using. and that
Yeah.
could compromise the data
So
that's in
sometimes
the.
it is, but sometimes it is. Let's take one of the casino attacks. I'll try to avoid using the brand names, but when you think about all these big, very high profile ransomware attacks, it could be as simple as you've got the keys to the kingdom, right? You've got the Active Directory passwords for the whole company, and all the identity passwords, and it's limited. There's probably 7 people in the company with that password, but you're one of them. And I call you up, using an AI voice generator, and I sound like your boss. And I say, hey, listen, I'm stuck. I'm with the CEO. I need that password right now. If you give up that password to me, all of a sudden, as the bad actor, can now shut you down across your entire system, change the password, and your entire organization is completely in the hands of a third party.
Got it.
What I call a
Mhm.
ransomware terrorist. And so I think it now, so that's scenario one. Scenario two is it's all backed up. So that happens, and you go, boop, I'm going to shut all that off, and I'm going to recover to a prior state and change the password back, and
Mhm.
you're back in control. So it's
Got it.
really
Okay.
about understanding that yes, there's an enormous amount of value with SaaS, but we've got to make sure that the IT departments remain in control of all of it.
All right. So talk about like you've raised a lot of funding through the
Sure.
past few years. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah, we've raised well over $140 million now, from Bain Capital and A Crew and Okta Ventures and Cisco Ventures and Lassian Ventures, and they're all wonderful. But I think what I would probably say here to be helpful to the audience is that, you know, it was my first time ever raising institutional capital. I'd never done that before HYCU, and I never really thought too much about it. I'd always thought about just how do you build a company and how do you make it successful. But in COVID, we grew 450% as people started really flying to cloud. People wanted a very easy way to might not only back up and recover their data, they wanted to migrate it to the public cloud so that they could, very easily not go into the office and still manage their entire environment. There was a lot of things that said, COVID performed digital transformation far better than any of the consultants because it pushed everybody to the cloud very, very quickly. And they found that they could use HYCU to do that. So we really leaned in hard and we grew 450%. And at the end of COVID, I got a call from Enrique Salem, and Stephen Cohen, who are both partners at Bain Capital. But Enrique was the former CEO of Symantec. He was kind of the godfather of backup, in our industry. And he calls me up and he says, look, I'm the general partner over at BCV, Bain Capital Ventures. And he says, I keep hearing about this little company, HYCU, and what you guys are doing. And he said, so I shared with him some of the numbers and told him some of the things we were working on. And 6 months later, we did an $87.5 million A round, the largest in BCV's history. So it was really very exciting for us. And it was a great opportunity to take this small company and really start to scale it up. And of course, that then comes with a whole new set of challenges. All of a sudden, you're going from a small company with 50 people and you've got 400 people and you're, in 10 different countries and you've got different offices. And all of a sudden, you really have to start thinking differently about the business. And I'm very proud of what we have achieved here. We've maintained a 90 NPS score ever since we took funding. And we really have worked very hard to make sure that we put the customers first and foremost in terms of everything that we're doing.
yeah, like so how like we've talked about your journey through multiple companies now. Like how have you learned to lead?
I think at its core, the hardest thing to remember when you're the CEO of a high growth company or any company is that you're not the most important person. That your job is really just to build a great vision, sell that vision, and then hire an amazing team. And the bigger you get, the less important, your day-to-day activities become. It really becomes up to whether or not your team is able to scale and grow the business for you and with you. And so I think you have to go from a position of it's all about me and my kind of chutzpah and getting out there and making the meeting with Nutanix and doing this and that, to a place where you go, I've got to focus all my time on hiring an amazing team and then I've got to trust them to go and do an amazing job. And I've got to just put in the vision and the guardrails to make sure that we can be successful together. And so there's kind of a mantra that I've adopted internally, which is earn your seat every day. And it's a reminder to myself that the person I was yesterday can no longer lead this company. You have to keep getting bigger and better, not bigger, but you have to keep getting better at your craft, and you've got to keep finding ways to evolve so that the person you are, the leader you are, is the right size and shape for the business you're actually running. And I always think back to, who I was and how I ran the business 3 years ago, before we took any money from Bain Capital. And that person wouldn't have a shot. I wouldn't be able to lead the company today. And I think this is really the key. It's just reminding yourself, earn that seat, come into work, earn it today, earn it tomorrow, because the person who was sat in that seat yesterday can no longer run this business.
And I meant to ask this before when we were talking
Yeah,
about the funding. So what I also thought was interesting about your investors, Bain Capital Ventures is
yeah,
amazing, a crew, but you took a lot of capital from, the corporate venture
yeah.
arms of tech companies, which um, I don't know if as many entrepreneurs go down that path, and maybe they should. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, again, it goes back to my partner ethos, right? So, at the end of the day, if you want to partner with companies and they've got a venture arm, it's a great way to start to get to know that company and to become a portfolio member. I take those investments very seriously. I mean, I speak very frequently with, Austin Ahrensberg over at Octa Ventures is phenomenal, for example. As an example, he is somebody who we work very closely with Octa. We love Octa. We use Okta technology and we integrate with Okta technology. We back up Okta. And so we make it really easy to recover all of your Okta configurations. And so who better an investor to have than the other side of that coin, the actual source provider. And what I like about working with those corporate venture capitalists is that they have a slightly different take. They're looking at their investment through the lens of the company they've invested from. And I think it really does give you almost a customer-like perspective on the market that can be really, really powerful as you're building your business.
So what's next? What's the look ahead for Haiku?
I always say that we want to build a multi-generational business. I mean, that to me is really, really important. I've done tech tuck-ins and exits and outcomes, and we want to have wonderful outcomes for our employees. But to do that, we need to really, really grow this business and make sure that we are a successful platform provider, going forward. My ultimate goal from a technology and vision perspective is I believe that we're going to have so many SaaS services. There's 30,000 today. I think it'll be 100,000 in the next 3 to 4 years. And so as that explosion continues, we need to be able to leverage artificial intelligence so that ultimately you can turn on HYCU, press a button, discover your environment, which we can already do, but then spin up custom integrations for any SaaS service you're using to be able to back up and recover that data. And it's that end result, which I think is going to really, really change how we think about protecting the world and how we ensure that every customer and every company and organization worldwide can finally feel safe again. That even if the data is not in their basement, in their own servers, it might as well be because they've got that protection locked down.
Yeah, there's so much going on in the world with obviously AI, and there's so many different use cases. It's endless. So the world's going through a massive transformation. So it's just going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out.
100%. 100%.
Mhm. All right, what are the three apps you can't live without?
That's a very tough one because this is what we do here in HYCU. So we support so many of them. I mean, number one is HYCU, of course. You need to be able to back up and recover all your data, and no matter where it sits, you've got to feel safe and confident with that. Two, I'm going to go with Okta. I think that proper identity management is the way that you secure all of your business, and you've got to be able to do that. And hell, I'll just say it. I'm very old fashioned. I still like a good PowerPoint.
That's awesome. I don't know if anyone's ever said PowerPoint after 350 plus episodes. How about a book or podcast recommendation for entrepreneurs?
Mm. One of my favorites recently has been The Five Temptations of a CEO. I think it is a phenomenal book, and it talks about, all of the things that we fall into a trap doing when we're running a company. Making it too much about yourself, thinking too much about, the wrong things, not trusting the people around you. We're caring too much about things that actually are not germane to scaling and building your business. I found it incredibly helpful. I've read it numerous times. I would definitely recommend that to anybody.
All right, outside of work, what do you like to do for fun?
I'm a big foodie. Probably my biggest sin. There's nothing I like more than a good digestation menu and traveling around the world to go and taste great food. Probably too much. But I've been thrilled to get to experience Michelin starred chefs around the world. And it really is one of the most sort of fun and exciting things that I do.
Very, very cool. I'm jealous. That sounds like fun. All right, Simon, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great stories about the companies that you've been building, including HYCU, and all the great lessons learned along the way.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.